On November 18, 1978, the United States government received a report that 918 Americans had died in the jungle in Guyana. They had not been killed by a foreign army or a natural disaster. They had been killed by their own leader, a man they called Father, who had convinced them that drinking poison was an act of revolutionary love. The youngest victim was an infant. The oldest was 83 years old, and the United States government had been warned it was coming and did almost nothing. Jim Jones was not always a monster. In the 1950s, he built a racially integrated church in Indianapolis, Indiana, at a time when Black and white Americans rarely shared the same pew. He fed the homeless, housed the poor, and built a community that genuinely helped people who had nowhere else to go. For thousands of people who had been rejected by society, Jim Jones was the first person who had ever made them feel seen and valued. That trust is what he would eventually weaponize. Through the 1960s, Jones built his People's Temple into a powerful organization with churches across California and relationships with politicians and journalists who praised him publicly. Behind closed doors, the People's Temple was already something else entirely. Members were required to hand over their wages, savings, and assets to the church. Those who questioned Jones or tried to leave were publicly humiliated, beaten, or threatened. Jones staged fake healings, read members' private mail to convince them he was psychic, and developed a serious drug addiction that was accelerating his paranoia. He became convinced the United States government was planning to destroy him and that nuclear war was imminent. He needed somewhere isolated, somewhere he could take his people away from the forces closing in on him. In 1974, the People's Temple began building a settlement in the jungles of Guyana that Jones called Jonestown. By 1977, over 900 people had followed him there, most of them Black Americans who trusted a man completely who was about to betray them in the worst possible way. What they found in Jonestown was not paradise. It was a labor camp. Members worked in brutal heat, from sunrise to sunset, slept in cramped conditions, and survived on inadequate rations. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, and mail was monitored and intercepted. Jones broadcast his voice over loudspeakers throughout the settlement day and night, delivering hours of rambling sermons that kept residents in a constant state of psychological exhaustion. And then came the White Nights. White Nights were late-night drills that Jones called without warning, summoning everyone to a central pavilion in the dark. He would announce that enemies were closing in and that the only dignified response was revolutionary suicide. Members were given a liquid he told them was poison. They drank it. Then Jones announced it had been a test. He conducted these drills repeatedly, conditioning his followers to drink without question when he gave the order. He was training them to die on command. In November 1978, United States Congressman Leo Ryan flew to Jonestown to investigate reports from desperate relatives of members. As Ryan's group prepared to leave with a small number of defecting members, Jones's armed guards opened fire on the airstrip. Congressman Ryan was shot and killed, along with 3 journalists and 1 defector. It was the first and only assassination of a sitting United States congressman in history. Back at Jonestown, Jones gathered his congregation at the Central Pavilion. He told them Ryan's murder meant the American government would destroy them, that the only choice left was the one he had been preparing them for. Vats of grape-flavored drink laced with cyanide were brought out. Parents gave the poison to their children first, using syringes to squirt it into the mouths of infants too young to understand what was happening. 276 children died that way. Then the adults drank. Those who hesitated were injected by force. Jim Jones was found with a gunshot wound to the head. 918 people died in Jonestown on November 18, 1978. The United States government had received multiple warnings in the years before the massacre. Former members who had escaped testified about the abuse, the armed guards, the white night drills, and the threats against anyone who tried to leave. Relatives wrote desperate letters to the State Department begging for intervention. The response was bureaucratic paralysis. Officials were reluctant to interfere with what was technically a religious organization operating in a foreign country. The warnings were noted, filed, and not acted upon. After the massacre, investigations revealed the CIA had been monitoring the People's Temple for years. Exactly what they knew about conditions in Jonestown before the massacre remains partially classified to this day. No one in the United States government was ever held accountable for the failure to act. The story of Jonestown is not really about a crazy cult leader. It is about how trust gets built, how it gets weaponized, and how institutions designed to protect people can watch a catastrophe forming in slow motion and decide that acting is too complicated. 918 people died because one man convinced them that love meant obedience, and because everyone who could have stopped it decided it was someone else's problem.